Welcome back to the show. Today we have Ken Aldrich. He's the founder at DreamToolbox.com. Ken, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you back on the show. You've done the radio and TV version in the past where we talked about all the stuff you were doing as a podcast and creating a bunch of content. You published a best-selling book called Dream Toolbox, and I want to get into that in a few minutes. But maybe before we get into that, let's get to know you a little bit better and start off with where you grew up.
I'm happy to do that. I grew up in Oklahoma.
Okay.
Back when Oklahoma was a much smaller town than it is today. So I had a semi-rural upbringing. We lived out on the fringes of town.
Okay.
Grew up there, went through high school in Oklahoma City through the public high school system. And then very fortunately had a mentor who thought that I had some potential that wasn't being realized there and persuaded me to make application to several Ivy League schools and 2 West Coast schools. And I was fortunate enough to get admitted to several of them and ended up doing my undergraduate work at Harvard and then ultimately went back there to the law school. So it was I was very fortunate. The reason I mention that is that a lot of what went into writing the book Dream Toolbox is my way of trying to pay forward my good fortune at having a mentor who took an interest in me originally when I was just a junior high school kid.
Wow.
And it made all the difference.
No, that's very cool. So walk us through your career, because you've done an astronomical amount of things, built a ton of businesses, invested in a ton of businesses, but do you maybe want to give us a little bit of your background, maybe some career highlights along the way, and then we'll dive right into the Dream Toolbox?
Okay, happy to do that. And if I skip something, an era that you're interested in, why jump in and let me know.
Sure.
As indicated, I ended up starting as a lawyer. Originally, I was being groomed to be a Protestant preacher, believe it or not, and actually spent a year in theological seminary in New York before I realized that that was not my calling and that I shouldn't be trying to force a round peg into a square hole. Ended up going back to the Harvard Law School and practiced law for about 4 years, I think, 4 or 5 years. A little bit of time in Dallas, and then moved very quickly to a large firm in Los Angeles and practiced law there until I had an epiphany moment. And I can describe it because it may be helpful to others. Sure. If for those of you who are old enough, there used to be an ABC Wide World of Sports program in which the opening trailer showed a skier, or maybe it was a tobogganist, I've forgotten which now, roaring down the hill, missing a turn, flying head over heels into a snowbank. And the tagline was, ABC Wide World of Sports, the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. And I remember seeing that, and I thought, I'm in a business which was transactional law. And for me, at least, there was never a thrill of victory. There was only the possibility of the agony of defeat. I could screw up a major contract or do something dumb, but there was no thrill of victory to it. The expectation was that you made no mistakes. So I thought, that's not really fun. Let me see if I can get out of this and get on the other side of the table and be a businessman. So I managed to persuade one of my clients to hire me in the investment banking world to set up help set up a real estate operation in Los Angeles, where we were basically syndicating real estate in one form or another and doing mergers and acquisitions. Did that until, unfortunately, the company went broke underneath me through no fault of mine, fortunately. And I was offered a chance to go back to New York with the company that bought them. And I thought, I don't want to go back and freeze in New York anymore. I like it out here in California. So I looked around and found another company that had been a client that knew me in the real estate investment trust business, and worked with them up for 4 or 5 years. And then, as chance would have it, the real estate market collapsed, and they also went broke. They ended up being sold to another company, but they were no longer capable of doing what they started out. So at that point, I said, there's something wrong with this model. I keep joining these companies and they keep dropping out from underneath me. I don't think I can screw this up any worse. Let me see what I can do in the real estate business. So I went on my own. I had a little bit of savings. which was important, so that I could last for, actually it lasted about 11 months before I got my first paycheck,
Wow.
but set up a real estate investment business, found some investors and friends who believed in me. And we started buying apartment buildings. Actually, the first thing I bought, I was one of the original house flippers, which I don't recommend as a career. But I bought and sold houses up and down the Malibu beachfront back when you could actually afford a house on the Malibu beachfront. And then moved into apartment buildings, office buildings. Two partners and I actually built a 30-story high-rise office building at one point, and developed the first wind energy park out in Palm Springs along the way. So I had kind of a long and checkered career in the real estate business. And then 1986 happened, and the savings and loan crisis came along, and it was no longer possible to finance real estate at high leverage basis.
Okay.
We financed a $100 million office building, and the most money I ever had in it was $100,000, and we got back over $1 million in the first construction draw. And then everything ended, and S&Ls were going broke, people were going to jail. It was not a nice time. So I said, okay, where can I go so that I don't have to go out and try to create an investment fund
Sure.
and still be an investor? And the answer at that time to me was early stage seed investment in companies.
Okay.
And that started the career that ended up where I am today. I've invested in probably 40 or 50 companies. I ended up started about 10, two of which really matured. The others were sold very early on, but fortunately at a profit.
Right.
And that's what I've been doing, what I still do, frankly.
That's very cool. So what exactly is the Dream Toolbox, and why did you decide to actually build it and write a book around it?
Well, the Dream Toolbox is not another how-to book on how to write a business plan, how to start a business. There are hundreds of those out there, and some very good ones. But I didn't want to just join a large crowd of people saying more or less the same things. And there is so much help. Nobody needed another book on that, as far as I could see.
Sure.
What I did not find was anybody writing about the mindset that it takes to be a successful entrepreneur. And in a sense, it's very, very simple. It's a set of core beliefs that says, in any situation, I can instead of I can't. There's a famous saying from Henry Ford that's, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. But there's not a lot out there that talks about that or how to build that set of core beliefs. So that was my first goal. The driving force behind it was to try to reach young people, just as I had been in junior high and high school when I was mentored, because I learned two things. One, obviously, just showing up and being a model for the kids is important. But the other thing was, often when I was working with kids, and I did that for a number of years and still do,
right,
in the classroom, I would discover that what really made a difference and opened up the windows of the mind, if you will, for some student, was a chance comment. It wasn't always a lengthy course. It wasn't anything particular. It was just something I said that struck a chord and set off a spark, if you will. So I thought, well, if that's the case, then it's a numbers game. I have to reach more than 30 kids at a time, or my impact on the world is going to be important but small.
Sure.
And so I started out by building the Dream Toolbox website, which is DreamToolbox.com, and I urge anybody interested to take a look at it.
And it's free. It's all the content is free.
It is free.
Yeah.
And on DreamToolbox.com, there are, I think now 21, I may add some more along the way, but little 4 and 5 minute audios. It's all audio, but the text is printed, so you can read it as well, of core principles of the entrepreneurial mindset. So it was really a precursor to the book. And what I discovered was an interesting thing, and that was that it was hard to reach the young people through the blog. I probably needed to be an Instagram wizard or something, but I wasn't getting through to the people. But what I was doing was reaching parents, teachers, friends, adults who would then say, Johnny or Sally, you need to go to this website. Then my friends twisted my arm somewhere up behind my ears and said, yeah, that's good, but if you really want to be credible, you got to write a book.
Okay.
There's more than just 21 little episodes. So, 6 or 8 months later, the book is published, and I'm now officially an author. And we were fortunate enough to get early bestseller status on Amazon.
Congrats,
Not
man.
sure
That's
how they
huge.
do all of that, but anyway, that's where we are.
No, that's awesome. So I read the book. It's really, really good. Do you want to dive into what you talk about exactly in the book and how it's similar and different from the video series or the audio series? Sorry.
I'd be happy to. In many ways, it's not different from the audio series. It's just much more expanded. There are many more personal experiences, because I think we all learn from storytelling, and we learn from other people's experiences rather than just, okay, take block A and put it on top of block B and whatever. And that's the way the typical business plan building book is. And so this is not about business plans. But what I became interested in were those trigger points that changed points of view. And the first of them was really, how do you build and define a dream? What does that mean? Because, the saying is very true. If you don't have a dream, how are you going to have a dream come true?
Sure.
And it's absolutely true in business for sure. And so I started, and I believe one of, if not the first chapter, is really about imagining what your dream is like. And I start with an exercise that I still think is incredibly valuable, and I do it myself from time to time as a reset, and that is to sit down with a piece of paper, turn off distracting noises, computers, etc., and write for about 5 or 10 minutes, doesn't have to be longer, everything that you can think of that you would really like to do if you knew that you could not fail. And that's the important part, because our brains edit us, and we'll start to write something, and then your mind says, no, I couldn't do that. And you mentally cross it off. And I think it's critical not to do that. I mean, imagine, for example, and you'll know this is an example in the book, but if Wilbur and Orville Wright had said, well, I'd really like to fly. And then they said, yeah, but man really can't fly. And so they crossed that off the list. I suppose somebody else would have come along and done it, but aviation might have started 10 years later.
Sure.
And certainly Wilbur and Orville Wright would not be household words. So I encourage people to do that, then put the list away for a day.
Okay.
And come back to it. And then you can edit some things, because there'll be some things you say, yeah, that's kind of nice and fun, but it isn't really something I want to devote my life and energy to. But they'll come out of that a small group of things you say, yeah, these are the things that are really important to me, or they wouldn't have made it on the list. So that's the step one, if you will. The second critical step is really what I call active dreaming.
Okay.
And that's also a very simple exercise. It's not new with me. I learned it from somebody else years ago. But it boils down to taking what that dream is and imagining what you will be, or you are, because you want to try to bring it into the present. What would my life be like? What is my life if I fulfill that dream? So to take a simple example, if my dream is just to have a brand new car, I want to imagine the look of it, the feel of it, how the leather feels, how the finish feels when I rub my hands over it, what the new car smell is, all of that stuff, and bring it in so that it becomes part of the sense memory. We've all had the dreams that we woke up from, and there was a period of time we said, oh, wait a minute, did that really happen, or was I dreaming? And the mind doesn't really know for a while. And then eventually you wake up, and of course you figure out it was a dream. In this case, what you're trying to do is recreate that in reverse, so that your mind has in the present kind of a constant vision of what I would be like if I were as successful as I want to be, if I had the dream house, the dream job, whatever it might be. Get that so real. And then the second step that I found was critical was to do it every day, to take period of time, not very long, took a few minutes, 4 or 5 minutes, maybe longer if I felt like it, and just shut my eyes and let my mind play with that dream as if it were real. Now, I don't know how this works neuropsychologically, but somehow or other, that process, particularly if it's done daily, sets the subconscious mind on a path to fulfill that dream. And I've had it happen to me. I've had friends who describe it happening to them. In fact, I did it, and you really feel stupid doing it, quite frankly, at the beginning. You say, come on, what am I doing here? But it works if you keep doing it. And I remember one day I woke up and I said, wait a minute, you've been drifting. You got to your dream as originally conceived quite a while ago. My dream was not a particularly noble dream in those days. I'd been poor all my life, and I just wanted to have $1 million in the bank so I could write a check for that wouldn't bounce. And then one day I said, you've been there for months. What are you doing now? What's your next dream? And I was drifting, frankly. And so I went through the drill, set a new set of dreams. And now I do that periodically because it's very easy to get where you go, because it's so much part of your present mindset that when you're there, that just seems normal. And you have to realize, okay, I need to set some stretch dreams and let's go to the next step. So anyway, that's been my experience. And that was what I was trying to capture in the book and create, write up or remember episodes in my own life that illustrated how it had worked.
No, that's very cool. The other thing that I love that you've talked about throughout kind of the book and in the audio online is how kind of sex, age, gender, race, all that stuff doesn't really matter. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Oh, absolutely. It's something I feel very strongly about. And I have to start by saying, in one sense, they do matter. I mean, I would be the biggest idiot in the world if I didn't say that it's been a huge advantage to me to be born a white male in the business world than a black female or whatever other mix that you want to put in there.
Sure.
But
agreed. Yeah.
None of those negative starting points, in my mind, should ever be conceived of as an insurmountable barrier. Yes, if you're female, yes, if you're black or Hispanic, whatever it is, you will, in all probability, have to work harder than other people. But the interesting thing is, in the long run, having to work harder probably ends up creating greater success. When I was young, I had a number of friends who were definitely in one kind of minority or another, and they did work harder than I did. And I was a little naive at that time. And many of them surpassed me and achieved greater success or achieved success earlier than I did, because they had built in themselves reserves and the capacity to not look at the color of their skin or their gender as a barrier, but as something they had to take seriously and work through. I think I put this in the book, I can't remember for sure, but I had a very good friend who was the president of a company that I had invested in, and we became good friends because I was helping raise money and so on and so forth.
Sure.
And when we would travel together, he always carried with him, he was black, and always carried with him a small travel iron. And he would get up every morning and press his suits before he ever went to a meeting. He was inevitably better dressed than any of the rest of us and just turned out properly. And I asked him one day, I said, why do you do that? And he said, I'm aware that I may be the smartest guy in the room or I may not be, but there's a risk that somebody on the other side of the table will perceive me as less capable than I am because I'm black. So I don't want to give anybody's prejudice an inch. I don't want to give them any excuse. And he didn't. And it was a key factor in his success. But he wouldn't have succeeded had he not been well-trained, articulate, done all the right things. He just went the extra mile to make sure that what was an annoying barrier or obstacle, what was an obstacle did not become a barrier. I love the analogy. I say, you know, one of the keys to entrepreneurial thinking is the person who really has no ability to be an entrepreneur sees a barrier as just that. And they say, oh, I've got to go a different route or give up and go home or whatever. The entrepreneurial mind looks at every obstacle as a puzzle to be solved.
Sure.
Or a maze, if you want. Say, okay, that looks really formidable, but I know it's a puzzle, and if it's a puzzle, there's a way to solve it. So how do I solve it? And when you make that shift subconsciously, and you get to that result by practice and by solving major hurdles and barriers until it becomes instinctive. But it's a huge, huge mind shift to look at everything as not a disaster, not an insurmountable wall you can't climb, but as a puzzle to be solved. Maybe you dig under it. Maybe you go around it. Maybe you rent an airplane and fly over it. I don't know what it is.
Sure.
But there's always an answer. And the entrepreneur finds that answer most of the time. Now, once in a while, you have a particular business opportunity that you can't solve. I mean, that's why not every business succeeds. But that doesn't change the entrepreneurial mindset, because you know, okay, that was a business plan that didn't work. We gave it our best shot. There was something wrong. We were too early, whatever the reasons. And there are a million reasons.
Sure.
But it doesn't mean I'm a failure. It just means I've got to come up with a different way to get to my goal, which was whatever the goal was. So anyway, that's my belief system. And I spent a lot of time trying to write about it in the book because I think it's incredibly important.
Sure. The other thing that I want you to touch on that I think is also really important to reiterate to people is coming from kind of being a wealthy background or kind of a poor background. Do you want to elaborate on how you could be successful no matter or fail no matter what economic background you come from?
Yeah, I do. And again, it's very much the same as ethnic or gender backgrounds. It's obviously easier if you grew up with wealth, not necessarily a lot of wealth. We all know some of us have always met somewhere the trust fund babies who their grandfather or their father gave them set up a trust for them and they have all kinds of money and they don't have to work. And most of the time, those people end up as failures. Not always, because they were never challenged. They never really trust they could do it on their own. But apart from that, it is an enormous advantage if you grew up in a family where finances were discussed over the business table or over the dinner table, where you saw examples of friends and family who were successful entrepreneurs in one way or another. So that is a big advantage. But again, it's not one that defines the game, because the world, particularly in the Western world, in the United States in particular, is just filled with people who have started from next to nothing and have become extremely successful. And they did it by creating the tools, learning to use the tools that we talk about in DreamToolbox, learning to use language well, so that because language is probably the single most important tool. If you can use the way you speak, the way you present yourself, the way you articulate things in a way that's persuasive and portrays you in a good way, you can solve most everything else. I'll give you a personal example that, again, I may or may not be in the book. I can't recall. It's funny, you go through the editing process and you forget what you left in and what you took out. But I never had a single course in accounting. I never had any math. Well, I had some math, but I never had any physics or biology in high school or even college. And yet I've started a group of companies. And strangely enough, the most successful ones have been in the fields of biotech and medical devices.
Interesting.
And I know nothing about those things. Now I do now. But what I was able to do was, because I did understand the language of finance, I had studied finance, I understood language itself. I'd been a debater, I made public speeches and so on. I was able to talk to people who had brilliant backgrounds and say, look, I can help you raise the money. I can help you find a way to make this company that we're going to create together a success. And in exchange, or not in exchange, but just as part of that process, really, I got some of the smartest people in the world to spend an enormous amount of time teaching me what I needed to know. The first public company I ever created was a biotech company built around stem cells.
Okay.
And the scientific founder was a woman who had been the chief cell biologist for the entire Soviet Union.
Ah.
And I can't tell you how many hours I spent sitting in her lab with her teaching me about cell biology. I never got to the point where I could interpret what was swimming around in a petri dish. There was a lot I never knew, but I did get far enough so that I could go to a scientific investor conference and I could talk about the company. And when I got the little nasty gotcha questions from the audience, I didn't flub them. She had taught me that. And I had the same thing happen in the optical space. We developed a company that created an optical device for surgeons. And again, by the time it was over, I had learned enough to walk the talk. But it was because I started out being able to articulate well and present myself well. So I always say, look, if you can read and talk and persuade people, everything else is available to you. Either people will help you, you can get it in books and whatever. That doesn't mean that all the STEM science and STEM programs are not hugely valuable. I could have used those many, many times, but they're not a barrier. You can get what you want if you train yourself with the right mindset. And I've probably digressed here more than you wanted me to. So bring me back.
No, it's good, but we're kind of coming to the end. So where can people get more information about DreamToolbox? Check out the free audio stuff online and get more information about the book?
Well, the easiest shortcut is to go to www.dreamtoolbox.com. That will lead you to a link that will take you to Amazon if you want to buy the book. It will also lead you to the blogs that are posted on that website. And I'm pretty sure that we still have up links to Twitter and Instagram and Facebook if that's your preferred social media. But the easiest starting place is just go to the website, dreamtoolbox.com, and prowl around and have a good time.
Perfect, Ken. Well, I really appreciate you again being on the show, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you, and have a good rest of your day, man.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye.